It's not in the face! Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Hey, Not the Face with your host, John Nash, and your producer, me, Steffi Haynes. And this is an emergency recording session. We are here at 1 p.m. Pacific time on, what is today? Today is March 20th, and the UFC has settled its antitrust case. Actually, both of them, both the Kung Lee versus Zuffa and the Cajun Johnson versus Zuffa cases have been settled. So John is going to field questions as that I lob them at him rapid fire because we have a very short window here. So John, are you ready to go?
I am. This is 3 episodes in a week. This is way too many for me, but I'm as ready as I can be.
3 episodes in 3 days, to be exact.
Oh my God, I'm ready to collapse. And here I am taking a break at my regular job just to do this for you degenerates out there that need more info.
He was gonna say pathetic degenerates, but
yeah,
he's trying to cut y'all some slack.
I'm here talking to you guys. What does that say about me?
Exactly. So first question. This comes from Rob Nashville on Twitter. He wants to know how many fighters are in each of the suits. We know that there's somewhere around 1,200 in the Kung Lee suit. If you have numbers for those 2 suits, that would be awesome.
Well, we don't. In the Kung Lee case, there's 1,214 fighters that fought during the class period that are potential class members. But all of them actually aren't eligible as class members because you remember, you have to be a resident of the United States or have fought in the United States or a U.S. citizen. So fighters that are not U.S. residents, not U.S. citizens that fought overseas, they wouldn't be eligible. And I did a rough calculation once. I think it's 200 to 300 fighters might be removed from that. So the class, let's just say roughly the class is actually about probably 1,000 members for the Lee class. The Johnson class, someone did an estimate. I don't want to screw up who did it for me, but someone tweeted an estimate. I think it was 1,500 fighters so far. Would be in the Johnson class. But again, one of the caveats on that is, remember, they introduced that class action waiver a couple of years ago. And that class action waiver says if you sign it, you can't take part in a class action. So they wouldn't be eligible to the Johnson case. So they were removed right there. And people that signed it too, if they had previous fights in the UFC since 2017, since the Johnson class started, they're removed. So they're completely removed from the Johnson class. And I got to say, based on, how many people have stuck around during that period and how many signed new contracts, it's probably 2/3, 3/4, 4/5 of the roster have those waivers. So that as we talked about in our previous episode, the Johnson class is very small. I don't have an exact number, but I'm guessing it's, a couple hundred members max.
Let's talk about the actual settlement. Why was it $335 million? Because a couple of years ago, you interviewed Gray Maynard and you estimated that this was going to happen. And you estimated a number that was very damn close to $335 million. You estimated the settlement would be around $300 million. This was 2 years ago. So talk to us about this 335 magical number.
Well, I thought actually it would be higher because we got past class cert and we got past the appeal process. So I thought it might be a little higher, and Johnson's involved, but we don't know how the formulation right now is exactly. And I know a lot of people are upset about the number, and I think I got to take some blame for that because even though I said it would probably settle, and I'm pretty sure I gave numbers in the couple hundred millions every time I said it would settle, much lower. We always started with the potential damages because, for me, that's what makes the UFC going to settle. But people hear that and they think that's what the fighter should get. So I honestly got to take some blame for getting people focus on the larger numbers when I probably should have stressed the settlement numbers more. But the other thing to look at, there was a recent National Association of Realtors settled a lawsuit where they lost. And the jury awarded the plaintiffs $1.78 billion, which was trebled, so over $5 billion in damages. That got settled down to $416 million. We talked about that on our previous episode. Mm-hmm. So that was the ballpark figure I thought this case would be looking at for kind of a settlement, because that seems to be the number. If you get up to that high a number, that seems to be the amount you'd settle for. So I don't know how it's broken down exactly, but you got to imagine that the vast majority of this is going to the Lee class because so many in the Johnson class have signed class waivers, which is sad because, it's going to be sad for Johnson fighters of the second class because they're going to see the guys on the previous class get a check of some sort, and they are not going to get anything, even though technically they settled and won some damages.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about injunctive relief. Obviously, we won't see everything that they wanted. If we are to go off of Nate Quarry's social media post in response to this settlement, it seems like they, and I quote, didn't get everything we want.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are looking at this announcement saying there's no injunctive relief, no contractual changes. We don't know that for sure. Based on Nate Quarry's tweet, based on the MMAFA tweet where they're kind of happy with it, I can't imagine those guys would tweet that they're happy with the results if there wasn't some sort of contractual changes. We'll have to wait and see what those contractual changes is, but I'm guessing there are some contractual changes that will only become public if the court agrees to the settlement, and then the true settlement will become public. Then we'll know what those contractual changes are. I don't think they're going to be the massive changes people were hoping for if they want a trial like a 1 year, 2 year duration. I think a good barometer of what they're like is remember the changes the UFC made in 2017 to split the classes, the ones that Francis Ngannou used to get off his contract, where they had the max amount that they could toll if you turned down fights. Declinations were capped at three times you could turn on a fight, 18 months maximum, 5-year sunset period. They gave fighters 3 clips to use or 2 clips and 20 seconds of footage. They gave them back their sponsorship, their image rights after 2 years. Various changes that were good, but not huge changes. I would kind of expect that we'll see more of that there'll be changes, restrictions on the contract put back in that are beneficial to fighters, but not incredibly far-reaching ones, not the game changers that some people were hoping for.
Do you think we're going to see shorter terms?
I would imagine, yes. I mean, one thing might happen. We just might go back to the 5-year sunset that Ngannou had. You sign it, and then 5 years later, it's done, instead of the current one they introduced where they have all these, loopholes to extend it even further past that. So that might happen, or maybe they get a 4. I don't know that. Again, we're just guessing. But at the very best, I'd say it's like the sunset will be like 4 to 5 years. The tolling provisions might have some caps on them. There will be some sort of restrictions on the UFC that'll be beneficial to fighters, would be my guess, but not so far reaching that it completely upturns the industry.
Just to recap for a moment, in the Lee case, not all 1,200 of the fighters are eligible. A few hundred of them, we estimate, won't be because they were not U.S. residents and the fights didn't occur on U.S. soil, correct?
Yep, exactly.
Okay, and the fighters in the Johnson case, the bare minimum, I mean, a small handful of fighters, maybe a couple hundred, will be all that is eligible for any kind of settlement in the Johnson case, correct?
That's my guess. That's just based on the information we have. It might be a little higher, but yeah, I cannot imagine it's more than half the fighters. My guess is it's actually much smaller than that.
Bearing that in mind, how does the division of this $335 million settlement come to fruition? How does it happen? Who gets what? And most importantly, what's the attorney's cut?
As again, we talked about in our previous episode, say again, I'm pitching, you should be listening to the Hey Not the Face podcast because you would know this. It sounds like the attorneys, they haven't officially said, but it sounds like they're using the loadstar method where it's basically they totally up the hours they work, the total amount they put into it. And then the judge will put a multiplier based on how good a job they did, basically. On average, if you look up the loadstar method, on average for large class actions, it takes up about 20% of the judgment, right? So if they take 20%, it might be higher, might be a little lower. We don't know exact amount yet, but if it's 20%, basically just imagine that they're taking an agent manager fee in MMA. The rest of the money, though, how it's divided up, they haven't calculated the exact method they're going to use, but it sounds like they're going to use a proportional method. In other words, based on how much money you made in the UFC during your period, that's how much money you would get awarded in damages. So if 500 million was the total amount during the league class period or that they're calculating, and you were a fighter that made 5 million, that means you did 1% of the total compensation of all the fighters in that period. You would get 1% of the total damages awarded. So it'll be proportional out to all of. So everybody in the class will get something. Another way to figure it, I guess, if all this money is going to the league class, it's probably 60% of their total compensation. I guess with fewer fighters, maybe we'll say it's 70% of the total compensation of the league class because there are fewer fighters going to be in the pool because so many are overseas and not going to be part of it. Well, if you made $100,000 during your UFC career from 210 to 217, your amount of that would be $70,000.
Just to reiterate, the lodestar method is how they figure out the attorney portion, correct?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. And the rest is how we figure out the fighter portion, because a lot of people seem to think that the fighters are just going to get that $335 million split up amongst them, $287,000 apiece. But we have attorneys' fees, and we have a lot of fighters that will not be eligible. And most importantly, it will not be split up equitably. It will be split up proportionally. Yeah. Don Davis was on Ariel Helwani's show earlier with his reaction to this. And of course, he starts pitching, come on over to the PFL. But Eric McGracken said something very interesting on Twitter to you. He wondered if the competing promoters could file suit now.
Oh, yeah, that's always been a possibility. There was suspicion that Bjorn Rebney in Bellator was planning a lawsuit against the UFC before he was kicked out and replaced by Scott Coker. In fact, there was a lot of rumors. I was looking into that at the time. That's why I stumbled onto this antitrust case. Paul Gift has brought up repeatedly that he's surprised that the other promoters haven't made monopoly charges. Now, one reason, PFL and one of them probably haven't is it's hard to raise capital from investors while claiming that we really can't compete with UFC. Please invest in us. We're going to be another UFC and make tons of money, but also we can't compete with UFC, so we have to sue them. It's very difficult to raise capital that way. So they have not been making that pitch, but it is a possibility in the future based on this. They could use this, present this as evidence and bring their own case that we cannot compete with the UFC because they have a monopoly over the industry. It would be a different lawsuit. Let's see if PFL does that because again, it's hard to raise capital if you're claiming you can't compete with the UFC. I will point out, Don Davis has been making this pitch for years now that you can make even more with the PFL. We can do it, but we'll offer you basically the moon if you're a needle mover. And only Francis Ngannou is the only fighter that's come over. Mm-hmm. And I think that's kind of telling. Is it because it's not that enticing, or the other possibility is they can't do it because they're restricted by the contracts? Either one's a possibility, but both would suggest that Don Davis's pitch that we offer just as much or more than the UFC, or we can offer just as much or more, doesn't seem to be working.
If other promoters, rival promoters, decided to sue, let's say PFL, would they be under the same sort of Damocles, so to speak, with injunctive relief, or that would not enter the case at all?
Yeah, that wouldn't enter the case at all. Right now, first of all, the injunctive relief is off the table for the UFC because there's a settlement. Right. So any contractual changes the UFC's agreed to, the other promotions have not agreed to those changes. They don't have to do it. Also, the other promotions are accusing the UFC of having a monopoly market power over the industry. Since they don't have any monopoly market power, they don't have to, there's no threat to the judge stepping in and make them change their behavior. So what will make them change their behavior is if the UFC does do contractual changes and they're better than other promotions. Well, if the industry leader does it, other promotions kind of have to follow to compete with them. So there might be a ripple effect in that sense.
Final question. When would you imagine that payments might start arriving to fighters?
No idea. We got to wait, 45 to 60 days for the court to make their decision. We'll have a better understanding what the payment schedule is and how it'll be divvied up when that gets announced. And we'll also know if there's any contractual changes or not. So we have to wait. But the good news is I did not book a trip to Vegas, so I saved some money there.
Exactly. So On that fine note, we are going to wrap up this emergency broadcast, and we'll be back with you guys next week as promised, and we'll be writing all the way through. So, y'all know the drill. Until next time, please stay safe.
Ow! Ow! Not the face! Ooh! Ooh! Okay, the face!